In Defense of Food, An Eater's Manifesto, by Michael Pollan. Introduction. Imagine for a moment a group of 10 people, middle-aged and overweight, their bodies struggling with the silent sickness of diabetes. For years, they've lived in a town, eating what the rest of us eat: flour, sugar, cheap meat, and soda. Their health is failing. Then, a scientist proposes a radical experiment. What if they could turn back the clock, not with a machine, but with a journey? The group agrees, and they leave their modern lives behind, traveling deep into the Australian bush, back to the lands of their ancestors. For 7 weeks, there are no supermarkets, no packaged foods, no labels to read. They live entirely on what the land provides. They hunt kangaroo and gather yams. They catch seafood from the coast and crocodiles from the river. They eat the way their people had eaten for thousands of years. At the end of those 7 weeks, the scientist, Karen O'Day, draws their blood again. And the results are nothing short of miraculous. Every single marker of their diabetes had either vanished or dramatically improved. Their blood pressure dropped. Their bodies began to heal themselves. They hadn't taken a single pill or modern medicine. All they did was change what they ate. They had escaped what the book we're talking about today calls the Western diet. This story isn't just about 10 people in Australia. It's about all of us. Because in a way, we are all living in a grand, uncontrolled experiment. We're the subjects, and the experiment is the modern food environment. The results are coming in every day, in the form of climbing rates of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. And that's why we're here today. We're going to dive into a book that acts as a map out of that experiment. It's called In Defense of Food, by the brilliant journalist and thinker, Michael Pollan. This isn't just a book, it's a manifesto. It's sold millions of copies and has fundamentally changed the way people think about what's on their plate. Pollan saw the same confusion that we all feel. We're bombarded with constantly changing advice. One day, fat is the enemy. The next, it's carbs. We're told to eat more of this nutrient and less of that one, yet we seem to be getting sicker and fatter. He decided to cut through all that noise and find the simple truth. And he found it. In just 7 words. Eat food. Not too much. Mostly plants. That's it. That's the secret. Now, you might be thinking, that's it? That sounds too simple. And you're right. It is simple. But in our modern world, understanding what those 7 words truly mean is the key to unlocking a lifetime of health and pleasure in eating. And that is my promise to you today. By the end of our time together, you will understand the powerful, liberating truth behind that simple sentence. You'll see the invisible ideology that has been shaping your food choices without you even knowing it. And you'll have a clear, simple path to escape the confusion and reclaim your health, one meal at a time. Let's begin. Book summary. So, how did we get to a place where a piece of advice as simple as eat food sounds revolutionary? What else is there to eat? Well, that's the heart of the problem. Michael Pollan argues that much of what is sold to us in the supermarket today is not, strictly speaking, food at all. They are, in his words, edible food-like substances. And to understand the difference, we have to understand the birth of an idea that has quietly taken over our minds and our kitchens. He gives this idea a name: nutritionism. This is the single most important concept in the book, so I want you to really let it sink in. Nutritionism is not the same as nutrition. Nutrition is the science of how food affects the body. Nutritionism is an ideology, a set of unexamined assumptions about food that has come to dominate our thinking. This ideology holds 3 core beliefs. First, that the most important parts of food are the nutrients. We're taught to think of food not as, say, an apple, but as a collection of vitamin C, fiber, and fructose. The food itself is just a delivery system for these invisible chemicals. Second, because these nutrients are invisible and mysterious, we need expert help to tell us how to eat. Suddenly, you need a scientist, a journalist, or a government pyramid to navigate the simple act of a meal. The authority of your mother or your grandmother, of tradition itself, is replaced by the authority of the lab coat. And third, the entire purpose of eating is reduced to a single goal: promoting physical health. Food is no longer about pleasure, community, family, or culture. It is a biological chore, a form of medicine we must take to avoid disease. This ideology didn't just appear out of nowhere. Pollan traces its rise to a specific moment in American history. In 1977, a Senate committee led by George McGovern was looking into the alarming rise of diet-related diseases like heart disease and cancer. Their staff, made up of lawyers and journalists, not scientists, put together a straightforward report. Their advice was simple and based on food. It said things like, reduce consumption of meat. Well, the meat and dairy industries went ballistic. The political pressure was so intense that the committee was forced to retreat. They quickly rewrote the guidelines. And in that rewriting, everything changed. The simple advice to eat less meat was transformed into the scientific-sounding jargon: choose meats, poultry, and fish that will reduce saturated fat intake. Do you see the shift? Suddenly, the conversation was no longer about real, tangible foods like steak or cheese. It was about an invisible, politically harmless substance called saturated fat. The food itself was let off the hook. This was a huge victory for the food industry. They can't easily sell you less food. But they can absolutely sell you new foods, engineered to have less of the bad nutrient and more of the good one. And just like that, the age of nutritionism was born. The supermarket shelves began to change. Where you once saw the names of foods, you now saw claims about nutrients. Low fat, high fiber, no cholesterol. The message was clear: real food was old-fashioned and unscientific. The future belonged to these new, engineered products, optimized by food science. This way of thinking is a dream for manufacturers of processed food. It allows them to take cheap raw materials, mostly corn, wheat, and soy, break them down into their chemical parts, and then reassemble them into products that can be marketed as healthier than the real thing. The ultimate example of this, Pollan says, is margarine. Margarine began as a cheap butter substitute. But when the war on saturated fat began, it was brilliantly repositioned. It was butter, but smarter. The bad stuff, the saturated fat and cholesterol, was taken out. The good stuff, the polyunsaturated fats and vitamins, were put in. Of course, there was a catch. The process used to make vegetable oil solid, hydrogenation, created a new industrial fat called trans fat. And we now know that trans fat is far, far more dangerous for our health than the saturated fat it replaced. But here's the magic of a processed food. When that embarrassing news came out, the industry didn't have to pull margarine from the shelves. They just re-engineered it again. Now with no trans fats. The product adapts, the ideology marches on, and an unknown number of people who followed the expert advice suffered the consequences. This focus on single nutrients creates a kind of nutritional whiplash. The history of nutritionism is a history of macronutrients at war. For decades, fat was the villain and carbohydrates were the heroes. We were told to replace the fat in our diets with carbs. So the food industry rolled out an endless parade of low-fat products: Snackwell's cookies, low-fat yogurt, pastas, and breads, often loaded with refined flour and sugar to make up for the lack of fat. What was the result of this grand, 30-year national experiment in low-fat eating? We didn't get healthier. We got fatter and sicker. In fact, many experts date the beginning of our modern obesity and diabetes epidemics to the late 1970s, precisely when we started following this advice. Pollan calls the low-fat campaign the supreme test of nutritionism, and its most abject failure. The problem is that this entire ideology is built on a shaky scientific foundation. The tools of science are best at studying one variable at a time. But food is not a single variable. A carrot is a complex chemical wilderness. A single leaf of thyme contains dozens of different antioxidants. When scientists try to isolate one active ingredient, like beta-carotene from that carrot, and put it in a pill, it often doesn't work. In fact, in some studies, beta-carotene supplements actually increase the risk of certain cancers. Why? Because the nutrient was taken out of the context of the food. The whole food might be more than the sum of its parts. The fiber in the carrot, or one of the hundreds of other compounds, might be necessary for the beta-carotene to work its magic. Science simply doesn't know. And as Pollan says, the great thing about eating foods as compared with nutrients, you don't need to fathom a carrot's complexity in order to reap its benefits. This flawed, reductionist science, amplified by journalism looking for a simple headline, and exploited by an industry looking for a marketing angle, has led us into a state of total confusion and anxiety. We've become a nation of what one doctor calls orthorexics, people with an unhealthy obsession with healthy eating. And here's the great American paradox: no people on earth worry more about the health consequences of their food choices, and no people suffer from as many diet-related health problems. So if nutritionism is the problem, what is the real villain it's distracting us from? Pollan calls it the elephant in the room, the Western diet. For over a century, a handful of intrepid doctors and dentists stationed in remote parts of the world noticed a strange pattern. When they worked with native populations eating their traditional diets, whether it was the Inuit in the Arctic eating mostly meat and fat, or tribes in Africa eating grains and vegetables, they found an almost complete absence of our modern chronic diseases. No heart disease, no diabetes, no cancer, no obesity, not even tooth decay. But as soon as these populations abandoned their traditional ways and adopted modern, Western foods, what they called store food, a predictable wave of diseases would follow. First came obesity, then diabetes, then heart disease and cancer, often in that exact order. One of these pioneers was a dentist from Cleveland named Weston A. Price. In the 1930s, he traveled the world, visiting a dozen isolated cultures, from Swiss mountaineers to Australian aborigines. He meticulously documented their perfect teeth and robust health, and he collected samples of their food. He found that these cultures thrived on an incredible variety of diets. Some were high-fat, some low-fat. Some were all meat, some mostly plants. What this proved to Price was that the human body is incredibly adaptable. We can be healthy on many different diets. But the one diet we don't seem to be adapted to is the Western diet. So what is this diet, really? What ties together the bread, the soda, the fast food burgers, and the breakfast cereals? Pollan argues that the industrialization of our food has led to 5 fundamental transformations. First, a shift from whole foods to refined foods. Think about what happens when you turn a kernel of wheat into white flour. The most nutritious parts, the bran and the germ, which contain the fiber, the healthy oils, and the B vitamins, are stripped away to improve shelf life and create a soft, pleasing texture. What's left is a nutritionally empty starch that our body digests almost as quickly as pure sugar. This is the story of modern food processing in a nutshell, a relentless drive to deliver energy, in the form of glucose and fructose, to our bodies as quickly and efficiently as possible. Second, a shift from complexity to simplicity. This happens at every level. Our soils are simplified, fed a diet of just 3 chemical nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, instead of the complex web of life in healthy organic soil. This simplified soil grows simplified plants, which have been shown to be less nutritious than they were 50 years ago. And our diet itself has become drastically simplified. Out of the 80,000 edible species on Earth, the modern food system is built almost entirely on just 4 crops: corn, soy, wheat, and rice. They provide 2/3 of the calories we eat. Third, a shift from quality to quantity. Our food system is designed to produce the maximum number of calories as cheaply as possible. Since the 1980s, American farms have produced 600 more calories per person, per day. But at the same time, the nutritional quality of that food has declined. You'd have to eat 3 apples today to get the same amount of iron as a single apple from 1940. This has created a new kind of human being, one never before seen in history: the person who is both overfed and undernourished. Fourth, and this is a huge one, a shift from leaves to seeds. This is true for us, and it's true for the animals we eat. For most of history, our diet, and the diet of our livestock, was based on green plants. But the industrial system is built on seeds, corn, soy, and wheat. This has caused a massive, unseen change in the chemistry of our food. Leaves and seeds contain 2 different kinds of essential fats: omega-3s and omega-6s. Think of omega-3s, which are plentiful in leaves, as flexible and fast. They're critical for brain health and for calming inflammation. Think of omega-6s, concentrated in seeds, as sturdy and slow. They're important for storing energy and mounting an inflammatory response when you get injured. Both are essential, but the ratio between them is what matters. For most of human history, that ratio was about 1:1, or maybe 3:1 omega-6s to omega-3s. Today, in the Western diet, that ratio is more than 10:1, and in some people, it's as high as 20:1. This imbalance, too many omega-6s and not enough omega-3s, is now believed to be a major driver of the chronic diseases associated with the Western diet, from heart disease to diabetes and possibly even depression. We have, without even realizing it, engineered a fundamental nutrient out of our food chain. And finally, the 5th transformation: a shift from food culture to food science. Before nutritionism, what guided our eating choices? Culture. Your family, your region, your traditions. These food cultures are reservoirs of accumulated wisdom, the result of thousands of years of trial and error, figuring out how to eat well in a particular place. In Latin America, for example, corn is traditionally eaten with beans. Why? Because corn lacks an essential amino acid that beans have, and vice versa. Together, they make a complete protein. Corn is also traditionally soaked with limestone, which releases a B vitamin that, if absent, causes the disease pellagra. When Europeans first adopted corn without its accompanying food culture, they got sick. The culture knew something that science would take centuries to figure out. The modern Western diet, with its marketing, its fads, and its scientific experts, systematically undermines these traditional cultures, leaving us lost and confused. So there you have it. That is the Western diet. A diet of refined, simplified, nutrient-poor foods, built on a handful of seeds, that has displaced the wisdom of culture with the ideology of science. It should be no surprise that it's making us sick. So the question becomes, how do we escape? How do we find our way back to real food in this treacherous environment? This is where Pollan's book becomes a practical, empowering guide. He unpacks his 7-word mantra into a series of simple, elegant rules of thumb. These aren't complicated prescriptions. They're more like algorithms, mental filters to help you navigate the supermarket and the dinner table. Let's start with the first rule: eat food. He offers a simple test. Don't eat anything your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. Imagine walking through the supermarket with her. She would see the apples, the carrots, the fish. But what would she make of a Go-Gurt portable yogurt tube? Is it food or toothpaste? If she read the label, with its long list of modified cornstarch, artificial flavors, and chemical preservatives, she would know for sure it's not the simple, cultured milk she knew as yogurt. This one simple rule can eliminate thousands of those food-like substances from your cart. Another filter: avoid food products containing ingredients that are unfamiliar, B. unpronounceable, C. more than 5 in number, or that include D. high fructose corn syrup. Again, this isn't because an ingredient like ethoxylated monoglyceride is necessarily poison, but it's a reliable marker that you're holding a highly processed product, not a food. Real food doesn't need a long list of ingredients. Here's a powerful one that might sound counterintuitive: avoid food products that make health claims. Why? Because real foods, like apples and carrots, generally don't have packages to print claims on. The silence of the yams is not a sign they have nothing to say about health. Health claims are a feature of the processed food industry, a tool of nutritionism used to sell you a product. Remember, margarine was one of the first foods to boast about being healthier for your heart. To follow these rules, Pollan suggests a simple supermarket strategy: shop the peripheries of the store and stay out of the middle. The outer walls are where the fresh foods usually are: the produce, the meat, the dairy, the fish. The center aisles are the domain of the processed, packaged goods. Even better, he says, is to get out of the supermarket altogether whenever you can. Visit a farmer's market. Join a CSA, which is a subscription to a local farm. Or plant a small garden. In these places, you won't find high fructose corn syrup or health claims. You'll find fresh, whole foods, picked at their peak of flavor and nutrition. You get to shake the hand that feeds you, restoring the relationship of trust and accountability that the long industrial food chain has broken. So that's how we eat food. Now for the second rule: mostly plants. This, Pollan says, is the one point of universal agreement among nutrition experts. A diet rich in vegetables and fruits reduces the risk of all the Western diseases. This is likely because of the antioxidants, the fiber, the omega-3s, and thousands of other compounds in plants that work in ways we don't fully understand. He specifies eating leaves especially, because leaves are where the most protective nutrients are concentrated, while seeds like grains and beans are primarily energy storage devices, higher in calories and omega-6s. This doesn't mean you have to become a vegetarian. Humans have been eating meat for a very long time, and it's a nutritious food. But we eat it in quantities that are historically unprecedented, around 200 pounds per person per year in America. He suggests following Thomas Jefferson's advice: use meat as a condiment for the vegetables, not the main course. And when you do eat animal products, follow another one of his brilliant rules: you are what you eat eats too. The diet of the animals we eat profoundly affects the quality of their meat, milk, and eggs. A cow is a ruminant, evolved to eat grass. When we feed it a diet of grain in a feedlot, its meat changes. It becomes higher in saturated fat and omega-6s, and lower in omega-3s and other vitamins. The same is true for chickens and pigs. A pastured egg, with its bright orange yolk, is a completely different food from a pale industrial egg. So, the rule to eat more leaves and fewer seeds applies to our animal friends as well. Finally, we come to the third, and perhaps most challenging rule: not too much. The scientific case for eating less is overwhelming. Calorie restriction is one of the most powerful links ever found between diet and the prevention of diseases like cancer. But simply telling ourselves to eat less in our food environment is incredibly difficult. This is where we must look to food culture. This is the part nutritionism completely ignores. Pollan looks at the so-called French paradox, how the French eat all that rich food and stay slimmer and healthier than Americans. The answer isn't some magic bullet in red wine or foie gras. It's in how they eat. They eat in small portions and don't take seconds. They rarely snack. They eat meals, together, at a table. And they spend far more time enjoying their food than we do. They get more pleasure from fewer calories. This leads to Pollan's most radical piece of advice: pay more, eat less. Our food system is built on making calories cheap and abundant. Better food? Food grown with care, in healthy soil, without chemicals, simply costs more. But by choosing to spend a bit more on quality food, we accomplish two things. First, we support a healthier food chain. But second, we naturally tend to eat less. When food is more expensive, we're less likely to waste it or overconsume it. And because high-quality food is more flavorful and satisfying, we don't need to eat as much of it to feel full and content. To help us eat less, he suggests we restore the institution of the meal. Try to do all your eating at a table. A desk is not a table. And your car is definitely not a table. Don't eat alone if you can help it. Eating is not just about fueling our bodies, it's about building community and culture. And finally, learn to consult your gut. Americans often stop eating because of an external cue. The plate is empty, the bag is finished, the TV show is over. Other cultures, like the Okinawans, follow a rule called hara-hachi-bu, eat until you are 80% full. This requires eating slowly, paying attention, and listening to our body's internal signals of satiety, skills that have been lost in the culture of fast food. In the end, all of these rules point to one final, powerful act: to cook. And if you can, to plant a garden. When you cook from scratch, you reclaim control over your food from the corporations and the food scientists. You know exactly what's in your meal. There is no high-fructose corn syrup or partially hydrogenated oil, because you didn't put it there. And when you grow even a little of your own food, something deeper changes. You reconnect with the simple miracle that food is not a product of industry, but a product of nature. You see it not as a pile of nutrients, but as a web of relationships, between the sun, the soil, the plants, and yourself. In the garden and in the kitchen, health is not something you have to worry about or calculate. It is simply a gift of eating real food. Well. Commentary. As we come to the end of our journey through In Defense of Food, I want to take a step back and reflect on what I believe is the book's most powerful and enduring lesson. This isn't just a diet book. In fact, it's an anti-diet book. It's a profound critique of the way we've allowed our relationship with one of life's greatest pleasures to become a source of anxiety, confusion, and sickness. The core message is one of liberation. It's about freeing ourselves from an ideology, nutritionism, that has served the interests of the food industry far more than it has served our own health. Pollan shows us that the endless debates about fat versus carbs, or this nutrient versus that one, are ultimately a distraction. They keep us focused on the microscopic details so that we miss the big picture, the systematic degradation of our food supply and the erosion of our food cultures. The problem isn't a single nutrient. The problem is the industrial food system itself. The problem is the Western diet. What makes this book so brilliant is that it doesn't leave us there, in a state of despair. It hands us a way out. And that way out is not a complicated new set of scientific rules. It's a return to something much older and wiser: tradition, common sense, and the evidence of our own senses. Eat food. Not too much. Mostly plants. This simple mantra is a tool for disengaging from the noise. It empowers you to walk into a supermarket, a place designed to confuse and manipulate you, and to see with perfect clarity what is food and what is merely a product of industry. It restores the authority of your own judgment. The most important shift this book encourages is one of perspective. It asks us to see eating not as a purely biological act, but as an ecological and cultural one. The rule "you are what you eat" eats connects your personal health directly to the health of a farm animal, and in turn, to the health of the soil. It reminds us that we are part of a food chain, and the health of that chain is indivisible. When we choose to buy food from a local farmer, we aren't just making a healthier choice for ourselves, we are casting a vote for a healthier, more sustainable world. So, how can you start applying these ideas today, in a simple, practical way? I'd suggest 3 small experiments. First, the next time you go grocery shopping, try using the great-grandmother rule. As you put items in your cart, just ask yourself, would she recognize this as food? See what happens. See what stays on the shelf. Second, commit to eating just one meal this week at a table, with other people if possible, and with no screens. No phone, no TV. Just the food and the company. Try to eat a little more slowly than you normally would. Pay attention to the taste and texture of the food. See how you feel at the end of it. And third, find a local farmer's market this weekend. You don't even have to buy anything. Just walk through it. Talk to a farmer. Observe the colors and smells of food that is truly fresh. See what it feels like to shorten the food chain. These small acts are the beginning of a revolution. They are acts of defiance against a food system that wants us to be passive, confused, and sick. By taking back control of our food, we take back control of our health and, in a small but meaningful way, the health of the planet. That was a deep dive into In Defense of Food by Michael Pollan. We've covered the core ideas today, but I have to be honest with you, a summary, no matter how detailed, is just the trailer. The real movie, the real transformation, happens when you sit down with a book yourself. It's in the quiet moments, when one of Pollan's stories or a particular phrase connects with your own life in a way you didn't expect. This podcast is designed to help you decide if this book deserves your time. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity or resonated with a feeling you've had about our crazy food world, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning information, it's an experience that can genuinely change your relationship with food for the better. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this summary valuable and it gave you some clarity, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.